The earth shakes at 3:08 in the afternoon. Workers on the surface feel the ground tremble beneath their boots. A dull, muffled roar rises from deep below, like thunder trapped in stone. Then comes the blast wave, a column of dust, debris, and superheated air erupting from the mine shaft, shooting 200 feet into the sky. Metal debris rains down across the compound. The explosion originates 1,200 feet beneath the hills of Soma, Turkey, in the Eniz coal mine, and when the dust finally settles on May 13, 2014, 217 men will be dead. They die from carbon monoxide poisoning, from fire, from cave-ins triggered by the blast, from oxygen starvation as rescue teams scramble too slowly through collapsing tunnels. Some die instantly when the coal dust detonates. Others survive the initial explosion only to find themselves trapped in darkness, their headlamps dimming, the air turning toxic, their radios useless. They scratch messages on tunnel walls. They huddle together. They wait for rescue that arrives too late or not at all. This is not an accident in the sense that the word implies randomness. This is the predictable outcome of a system designed around cost-cutting, corner-cutting, and the deliberate disregard of known dangers. Coal dust explosions are not mysteries. The science is understood. The prevention methods are established, but prevention costs money. And in Turkey's privatized coal industry, money matters more than men. To understand how 217 miners come to die in a single afternoon, you must understand the economic transformation of Turkey's coal sector. For decades, the nation's coal mines operate under state control. The government employs the miners, sets the safety standards, absorbs the costs. But beginning in the early 2000s, Turkey embarks on an aggressive privatization campaign. State-owned mines are sold to private companies at bargain prices. The logic, promoted by politicians and economists, is that private enterprise will bring efficiency, modernization, increased production. What it actually brings is a race to the bottom. Companies compete by slashing costs. Labor becomes cheaper. Contractors replace unionized workers. Salaries drop. Benefits disappear. Safety systems, expensive to install and maintain, are treated as optional. Inspections become infrequent and toothless. The Soma region, rich in lignite coal, becomes a focal point of this transformation. Soma Kömürüşletmeleri, A.Ş., the company operating the Eniz mine, takes over operations in 2005. Production increases dramatically. The workforce expands. But the infrastructure, ventilation systems, dust suppression equipment, emergency escape routes, does not keep pace. The company is praised in industry publications for its productivity. It wins government contracts. Its executives appear at conferences to discuss best practices. Meanwhile, underground, miners work 12-hour shifts in tunnels where coal dust accumulates in thick layers, where ventilation fans sputter and fail, where methane detectors are ignored or broken. If you want to know why Soma happens, start here. In the decision to treat human beings as disposable inputs in a profit equation. If you care about these stories, about understanding why disasters repeat, unsubscribe now. This channel exists to remember what others want forgotten. A coal mine is a controlled excavation into seams of compressed organic matter formed over millions of years. Miners extract the coal using machinery, cutting, drilling, blasting. The process generates enormous quantities of dust. This dust, fine particles of carbon, hangs in the air, coats every surface, fills the lungs of workers. It is also explosively flammable. Coal dust explosions are well-documented phenomena. They have killed thousands of miners over the past 2 centuries. The mechanism is understood. Dust particles suspended in air, given an ignition source, A spark, a flame, a hot surface ignite simultaneously. The combustion front propagates at supersonic speeds, generating temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, producing blast waves powerful enough to collapse tunnels and pulverize equipment. More dust is thrown into the air by the blast, feeding secondary explosions that can travel for miles through interconnected tunnels. Preventing coal dust explosions requires constant vigilance. Dust must be suppressed. Water sprays, ventilation systems, regular cleaning of surfaces. Methane levels must be monitored continuously. Methane, a byproduct of coal decomposition, is lighter than air and accumulates in roof spaces, where it forms pockets of explosive gas. Ignition sources must be eliminated. Equipment must be spark-proof. Smoking is forbidden. Electrical systems must be intrinsically safe. Rock dust, crushed limestone, must be spread throughout the mine. Rock dust does not burn. In the event of a coal dust ignition, rock dust in the air dilutes the coal dust concentration, interrupting the combustion chain reaction. These are not theoretical recommendations. These are proven, mandatory practices in every developed mining nation. But at SOMA, they are not implemented. Inspectors note inadequate ventilation. Workers report methane accumulations. Dust layers coat the tunnel floors, the walls, the machinery. Rock dusting is sporadic at best. The company argues that Turkish coal is different, that lignite poses lower risks than bituminous coal. This is nonsense. Lignite produces more dust, not less. The danger is equal or greater. The invisible threat in the Soma mine is not the darkness or the depth. It is the air itself. Miners breathe air heavy with coal particles. The dust infiltrates their lungs, or causing pneumoconiosis, black lung disease, a progressive, irreversible scarring that slowly suffocates its victims. But the acute danger is methane. Methane is odorless, colorless, undetectable without instruments. It seeps constantly from the coal seams. In concentrations above 5%, it becomes explosive. Above 15%, it can detonate from the smallest spark. The Soma mine uses outdated ventilation systems. Fresh air is supposed to be pumped down through intake shafts, circulated through the working areas, and exhausted through return shafts, carrying methane and dust with it. But the fans are underpowered. Airflow is insufficient. Methane accumulates in pockets along the ceiling. Miners know this. They report it. Maintenance logs document repeated sensor alarms. Engineers recommend upgrades. The company delays. Upgrading ventilation requires shutting down sections of the mine, installing new equipment, losing weeks of production. The calculation is simple. The cost of prevention versus the probability of disaster multiplied by the cost of disaster. As long as that equation favors inaction, inaction prevails. Workers are told to be careful, to watch for warning signs, to report problems. Responsibility is individualized, pushed downward onto the workers themselves, even as the systemic failures that create the danger are ignored. What do you think? Should miners have the right to refuse unsafe work? Leave a comment below. This is a question with an obvious answer, but in Soma, miners who raise safety concerns too loudly find themselves unemployed, replaced by the long line of desperate men willing to take any job, no matter the risk. Soma is not the first. Turkey's coal mines have a grim history. In October 1992, an explosion at the Kozlu mine in Zonguldak kills 263 miners. Methane ignition, inadequate ventilation, delayed rescue. In 2010, an explosion at Karadan kills 30. Methane again. Poor ventilation again. The pattern repeats. After each disaster, there are investigations, reports, promises of reform. New regulations are drafted, safety committees are formed, and then nothing changes. The mines reopen. Production resumes. The economic pressure to extract coal cheaply overwhelms every other consideration. International mining experts examine Turkish mining practices and issue warnings. The International Labour Organization publishes reports highlighting deficiencies. Turkish mining unions stage protests, demanding enforcement of existing safety laws. The government responds with platitudes. Turkey is a developing country, officials say. Standards cannot be imposed overnight. The industry needs time to modernize. But this is false. Turkey is not poor. It is a middle-income nation, a NATO member, an industrial power. The technology exists. The knowledge exists. What is missing is the will to prioritize human life over corporate profit. And so the warnings accumulate, unheeded. Inspectors note problems and write reports that gather dust in ministry offices. Engineers recommend fixes that are never funded. Workers share stories of near misses, of gas pockets igniting and burning out before triggering a full explosion, of tunnels collapsing and being shored up with inadequate supports. Each near miss is a warning. Each warning is ignored. The system continues, unchanged, until the afternoon of May 13, 2014. Soma is a mining town. The mine is the economy. Fathers, sons, brothers, cousins, entire families work underground. The mine employs over 5,000 people directly, and thousands more depend on it indirectly. Shops, schools, hospitals, the town's infrastructure exists because the mine exists. This creates a cruel dependence. Miners know the risks. They hear the stories. They attend the funerals. But they also need the wages. Unemployment in rural Turkey is high. Alternative jobs are scarce. A man with a family cannot simply quit because he fears an explosion. He goes to work. He hopes. He prays. And the company exploits this desperation. Wages are kept low. Contracts are temporary. Benefits are minimal. Unionization is discouraged, sometimes violently. Workers who complain are blacklisted. The message is clear. You are replaceable. There are 100 men waiting to take your job, so keep your head down. Do your shift. Don't ask questions. This dynamic is not unique to Soma. It is the fundamental reality of labor in industries where danger is inherent and workers lack power. The miners are not ignorant. They understand the risks better than the executives who manage them from air-conditioned offices in Ankara. But understanding does not grant them the power to change the system. They are trapped by geography, by economics, by the absence of alternatives. And so they descend into the earth each morning, knowing that they may not return, because the alternative, poverty, hunger, homelessness, is a slower, more certain death. The shift begins like any other. At 6 a.m., over 800 miners gather at the pit head. They check in, collect their equipment, helmets, lamps, breathing apparatus, radios. They board the cage, a metal elevator that plunges down the main shaft, dropping a quarter mile in seconds. The descent is routine, but never comfortable. The air grows hotter, thicker. The smell of earth and machinery intensifies. At the bottom, the miners disperse to their assigned sections. Some head to the coal face, where cutting machines tear into the seam, filling conveyor belts with black chunks destined for power plants. Others work maintenance, shoring up tunnels, repairing tracks, servicing equipment. The Inez mine is vast, a labyrinth of tunnels stretching for miles, extending from the main shaft, like veins from an artery. Communication is difficult. Radio signals are spotty. Darkness is absolute beyond the reach of headlamps. At 3:08 p.m., in a section nearly 2 miles from the main shaft, Methane accumulates in sufficient concentration and encounters an ignition source. The exact source is never definitively established. A malfunctioning electrical component, a spark from a cutting machine, a smoldering conveyor belt. It does not matter. The methane ignites. The flame front expands in milliseconds, a sphere of fire that consumes the oxygen in the immediate area and generates a shock wave. The blast wave stirs the coal dust that coats every surface. The dust enters the air as a fine cloud. The heat of the methane fire provides the ignition. The coal dust detonates. This is the primary explosion, the initiating event. It generates temperatures hot enough to melt steel. Miners in the immediate vicinity are incinerated, their bodies reduced to charred remains. But the explosion does not stop there. The blast wave travels through the tunnels, propelled by the expanding gases, reaching speeds of over 2,000 meters per second. It overtakes fleeing miners, ripping through their bodies, rupturing lungs, shattering bones. It collapses tunnel supports, bringing down thousands of tons of rock, and everywhere it goes, it throws more coal dust into the air, triggering secondary explosions, a cascading chain reaction that races through the mine, section by section, tunnel by tunnel, killing indiscriminately. The destruction spreads in waves. The initial blast travels up the main tunnel toward the shaft, gaining force, accumulating dust, growing in intensity. Miners near the shaft feel the pressure wave hit them like a physical blow. Some are thrown against walls, knocked unconscious, and others are buried as roof collapses bury the tunnel floor. The explosion vents through the shaft, erupting onto the surface in a spectacular plume of dust and debris. Workers on the surface are injured by flying metal. Buildings near the shaft are damaged. Alarms begin to sound, but by then it is too late. Underground, in sections not directly affected by the blast, miners realize something catastrophic has occurred. They feel the tremor. They see the lights flicker and die as the electrical system fails. They hear, faintly, the roar of the explosion echoing through distant tunnels. Some begin to evacuate immediately, moving toward the shaft, toward safety. Others, trained to respond to emergencies, move toward the site of the disaster, hoping to help. Many never make it. Secondary collapses trap them. Carbon monoxide, and produced by the burning coal and the incomplete combustion in oxygen-depleted air, spreads through the mine. It is a silent killer, odorless, tasteless, invisible. Miners breathe it without knowing. It binds to hemoglobin in the blood, preventing oxygen transport. Victims become dizzy, disoriented, then unconscious, then dead. Some miners, realizing the danger, don breathing apparatus and barricade themselves in side tunnels, hoping to survive until rescue arrives. They stack debris to block the toxic air. They wait in darkness, their oxygen supplies limited, their only hope that someone above ground is organizing a response. The final count is 217 dead. Some bodies are recovered quickly, found near the shaft, killed by the blast itself. Others are found days later in distant sections of the mine, de-asphyxiated by carbon monoxide or crushed by cave-ins. Some are never recovered whole. The heat of the explosion, the force of the collapses, leave only fragments. Identification takes weeks. Families gather at the mine entrance, waiting for news, clinging to hope, even as the hours pass, and that hope becomes irrational. The grief is compounded by rage. Relatives demand answers. How did this happen? Who is responsible? Why were the warnings ignored? The company issues statements expressing sorrow and promising cooperation with investigations. Government officials arrive, offering condolences and vague assurances of accountability. But the families are not comforted. They know the truth. This was not an accident. This was negligence, willful and sustained, a conscious decision to prioritize profit over safety. The funerals stretch over weeks. The town of Soma becomes a landscape of mourning. Black flags hang from every building. Graveyards fill with fresh headstones. Widows and orphans walk the streets, their faces blank with shock. The psychological toll is immeasurable. This is a community that has lost a piece of itself, a wound that will never fully heal. The miners are remembered not as statistics, but as individuals, fathers who played with their children, husbands who kissed their wives goodbye, sons who called their mothers from underground, joking about what they would eat for dinner that night. All of that is gone now, erased in an afternoon. The investigations begin immediately. Government inspectors, mining engineers, international experts descend on Soma. They examine the wreckage, interview survivors, review maintenance logs. The findings are damning. Ventilation systems were inadequate and poorly maintained. Methane monitoring was sporadic. Dust suppression was insufficient. Rock dusting was not performed according to standards. Escape routes were blocked or poorly marked. Emergency response plans were outdated and unrehearsed. Every safety regulation, every best practice, every recommendation from previous investigations ignored. The company blames the workers. They suggest carelessness, smoking in prohibited areas, failure to follow procedures. This narrative is quickly discredited. Survivors testify to the systemic failures, to the repeated complaints, to the explicit refusal of management to address known hazards. Documents emerge showing that inspectors had noted violations and recommended corrective actions, but the company had either contested the findings or delayed implementation. The government's role is equally disgraceful. The Ministry of Energy had received multiple reports from the mine's engineers warning of dangerous conditions. No enforcement action was taken. Inspections were infrequent and superficial. Fines for violations were trivial, easily absorbed as a cost of doing business. Political connections between the company executives and government officials raised questions about regulatory capture, about whether the mine was allowed to operate unsafely because the right palms had been greased, the right campaign contributions made. Criminal charges are eventually filed against company executives and mine managers. Trials drag on for years. Some are convicted, sentenced to prison terms that seem absurdly light given the scale of the tragedy. Others are acquitted on technicalities. The company pays compensation to victims' families, amounts that cannot replace a lost father, a lost son. The money is accepted because families need it, but it brings no peace. So why does it keep happening? Why, despite the technology, the knowledge, the clear lessons of past disasters, do coal mines continue to explode? The answer lies in the economic structure of the industry itself. Coal is a commodity. Its price is set by global markets, by supply and demand, by competition with natural gas and renewables. In a competitive market, producers reduce costs to maintain profitability. Labor costs can be reduced only so far before productivity suffers. Equipment costs are largely fixed, the easiest cost to cut. The cost with the least immediate consequence is safety. Safety spending is preventive. It avoids disasters that have not yet occurred. The benefits are invisible. A disaster that does not happen leaves no trace, generates no headlines, creates no pressure for action. But the costs are visible and immediate. Installing proper ventilation, upgrading methane monitors, hiring additional inspectors, training workers properly, all of this costs money, reduces short-term profits, makes a company less competitive. In a privatized industry with weak regulation and minimal enforcement, the rational economic decision is to underinvest in safety and accept the risk of disaster. This is not a moral judgment of individual executives. though many deserve moral condemnation. This is a structural analysis. The system creates incentives that lead, inevitably, to preventable deaths. And those deaths are not evenly distributed. They fall on workers, on the poorest and most vulnerable, on men with no other options, on communities with no alternative industries. The executives, the shareholders, the politicians who enable this system, they face no physical risk. They are insulated by distance, by class, by wealth. Do you believe economic growth justifies this cost? Tell us what you think in the comments. The legacy of Soma is contested. In the immediate aftermath, there is genuine outrage, mass protests, political upheaval. The government promises sweeping reforms. Safety regulations are tightened, at least on paper. Inspections are increased, at least temporarily. Some mines are closed for safety violations, but the underlying economic pressures remain. Turkey still needs coal. Power plants still demand fuel. Companies still compete on cost. And gradually the attention fades. The media moves on to other stories. The protests dwindle. The political pressure eases, and the system reverts to its previous equilibrium. Mines reopen. Production resumes. The same corner-cutting, the same risk-taking, the same willful disregard for human life. There are changes, to be fair. Some mines do improve their safety systems. Some workers do gain more power to refuse unsafe work. But these changes are incremental, incomplete, reversible. They are not structural. The fundamental dynamic, the prioritization of profit over safety in a privatized, under-regulated industry, persists. And so, the risk persists. Another disaster is not a question of if, but when. The lesson of Soma, the lesson of every industrial disaster, is that prevention requires more than knowledge and technology. It requires the political will to enforce safety standards, to hold companies accountable, to empower workers, to accept that some costs cannot be reduced, that some risks are unacceptable regardless of the economic consequences. But that will is rare. It emerges briefly in the aftermath of tragedy when the bodies are still being counted and the grief is still raw. And then it fades. The 217 men who died at Soma did not die because coal mining is inherently dangerous. They died because the people responsible for their safety decided, consciously or unconsciously, that their lives were worth less than the cost of protecting them. That is the truth. That is what we must remember. If this story matters to you, if you believe these men deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Make sure that Soma is not forgotten, that the next disaster cannot happen in silence, that the pressure for change does not fade with the news cycle. The miners of Soma are gone. Their families carry the loss every day. The least we can do is bear witness to remember and to demand that it never happens again.